Welcome to the Twisted Pint Tavern. So I was browsing ye olde Reddit and came across this post, how to deal with players that don't pay that much attention. And I found the responses a bit extreme. A lot of people were suggesting that the poster just kick the players from their game, and while yes, that sometimes is the solution, I thought it would be good to go over a few tips and tricks for keeping players invested in the game that you could try before, just... First, I need to acknowledge that yes, sometimes people just don't pay attention or respect your time, and the best thing to do is remove them from your gaming group. There's a ton of reasons to give someone the boot, and if they're blatantly disrespecting your time and efforts as a DM, that can 100% be a valid reason. The OP here mentions that their players are sometimes playing games on their phones or talking over each other mid-session, and that when they bring it up, the players just brush them off. If this keeps happening and you've tried everything to get them to respect the table, or in this case the Roll20 session, then you're absolutely valid in removing them from the game. However, sometimes you may not want to do this, like if they're close friends, for example. Hopefully, these tips can help a bit. Tip 1 is to first try and figure out why they're focused on other things or seemingly distracted. They may just have attention and focus complications, or it might be something that you're doing unknowingly. I am not saying your game is boring, but nowadays a lot of people struggle to focus on things like text and dialogue without something else going on as well to help keep their minds from wandering. I mean, just think about the 5 billion TikToks out there with subway surfers going on in the background. I mean, I think it's dumb, and yet I even find myself focused in on them sometimes. The point here is that sometimes people with ADHD and other focus-related complications can actually focus better with a second activity, where to others it looks like a distraction. I mean, my wife keeps fantasy coloring books with her D&D stuff because she actually picks up more of the story and keeps engaged in combat more when she's got something else going on as well for this exact reason. Now, that being said, there are plenty of cases where a player might not be attentive to the game, and it's not an ADHD related thing. In this case, there are things we can try to do as DMs to hold their focus a bit more, and I personally have found success with these. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but it's worth a shot. Before we get into tip 2, I want to take a moment to shout out the sponsor for today's video, Homie and the Dudes, The Wandering Tavern. The Wandering Tavern is an incredible D&D setting on an island-sized airship with a heavy Studio Ghibli-inspired vibe. In The Wandering Tavern, you'll be able to explore, interact, and tell amazing stories with your friends as you get immersed in this unique and fantastical location. If that's something you want to try, you can grab it today at the link below. Everything is 25% off when you use my code TWISTED25. The Wandering Tavern includes setting overview and lore, an insane battle map consisting of 14 cross-section layers, descriptions of key locations, plot hooks, fully staff-locked NPCs, new items and spells, new player feats, and over 10 D&D table recipes from pubs and eateries within the Wandering Tavern. And as a tavern keep, I highly recommend it. Check it out with the link in the description. Tip 2, don't just have one spotlight. There are 2 main times that I've noticed players are more likely to lose focus, and one of them is during split party roleplay, or roleplay where 1 or 2 people are the sole focus despite the whole group being at the table. An example of the first case would be your players entering a town after clearing out a dungeon. They figured out who was giving orders to those bandits that have been raiding the nearby villages, and it's time to take that information to the king. A couple of your players say they want to go straight to the keep and progress the plot, but a couple of them also say they'd like to go visit the market district to sell off some loot and buy new gear. So the party splits in town. Now you can't exactly hold 2 entirely different roleplay sessions at once, so more than likely you'll pick one to do first, maybe the plot related one. While you're focusing on that group, the ones heading to the market are kind of put on pause for a moment. Depending on how into the roleplay the players get with the king, it could be a good while before the shoppers get any actual gaming in. So they might pull out their phones or hold side conversations that could be distracting to the others at the table. If they're being unreasonably disruptive, then yeah, that's a problem. But if they're keeping fairly quiet and not interrupting anything, then you can't really blame them for getting a bit bored when they're on the sidelines for half an hour. Sure, it gets frustrating if they miss out on important plot because they're distracted, but again, their characters aren't even there. So what do? Well, there's a couple options. One is to limit each side of the table's roleplay to a few minutes at a time. Find natural breaks, like if the players are told to wait right here while I go get the king, then swap to the other side, allowing the other players to have a bit of the spotlight for a bit. Then when another natural break pops up, swap again. This way there's not long periods of time between engagements, because those are immersion killers. Now let's say you finish up with the shopping pretty quick, but there's still a good bit of plot conversation to be had with the king. You might be able to let the shoppers join the others at the keep, but depending on the size of the town, the current events, etc., that might not work out. So throw a random thing at the shopping party. Maybe while they're walking through the market, a couple of kids bump into the bard and swipe her coin purse. Now the shopping players are engaged in a city chase, knocking barrels over and splitting through crowds trying to catch up to the thieves. Keep both sides of the table engaged with the game, and don't solely focus on one group for too long, and you might find the phones get pulled out less. If you're not sure what random engagements to throw at split parties, I've put together a few tables you can roll on or pull inspiration from, which will be free on my Patreon and linked in the description. Tip 3, keep combat dynamic. The other place where players' attention falters the most is in combat. As the DM, it can be hard to notice when combat has slowed down significantly because you're involved in everything. Every turn, even the players' turns, are also your turns, so you always have something going on, and that can give combats a false sense of activity. In reality, as a player, you might be sitting for a good while in between turns just to roll your d20, then damage dice, and go back to sitting. This especially happens in large combats, or when you have casters who don't plan their next turn in advance. Nudge, nudge. In order to help prevent this, there are a few things you can do to help keep players engaged even when it's not their turn in initiative. 1. Give them opportunities to use their reactions. I know reactions aren't meant to be used every turn, but if your players are hardly ever using their reactions, then there's not as much reason to pay attention when it's not your turn, unless the DM says, "So-and-so, you are hit for 8 damage." Don't just keep enemies in the same place on the battlefield. Have them move around, reposition, or change target priorities so that your players can make those so sought after opportunity attacks. Sure, it might not be the most strategic thing for every enemy to do, but you're saying a tanky or dumb enemy wouldn't ever proc an attack of opportunity? The 3 goblin stooges might just randomly disengage and try to flee the combat if they get low, and then the players get a chance to drop them with an opportunity attack. Or maybe the coordinated evil soldiers withdraw from the front lines to take cover and pull out their crossbows. Sometimes taking damage is the most strategic move, and even if it's not, people make mistakes. So let your fighter whack an orc with his mace as he tries to flee, or let your wizard with Warcaster finally cast a spell as an opportunity attack because the vampire he was next to realizes the cleric is wounded and tries to run to him and secure that kill. Next, try to keep combats, especially big ones, to be more than just attack rolls. There's a lot that can happen in the middle of a fight, whether it be environmental, strategic, etc. If a combat has gone on for a few rounds and you think your players might be losing focus a bit, throw in something new. Maybe during that fight in the goblin caves, one of the little bastards runs to the wall and pulls a lever, dropping some oil flasks on the ground followed by a spark. Now the battlefield is dealing passive fire damage, and the players are not only tracking that damage, but they now have to figure out how to get out of the fire. Maybe as your players are fighting some bandits that tried to ambush them, the bandits start slowly pulling the fight into the tree line a bit, and after a few rounds of the fight shifting into the forest, a couple of your players step into snare traps that the bandits set in case they started losing the fight. Or maybe after a few rounds, some arrows start to hail from the trees, and you notice that a few reinforcements have shown up, and now you're being attacked from both sides. Little things like this can really keep your players on their toes, and the second they have to start strategizing how to get out of a tricky situation, you'll find they spend more time looking at their character sheets and talking combat tactics than they do sitting on their phones. Well, ideally. If you want some inspiration on combat shenanigans, the same free Patreon tool I mentioned earlier has some tables for that too. Link in the description. Tip 4 kinda relates back to tip 2, which is to not focus solely on one player at a time. Even in hardcore backstory related moments, if you spend too much time in what is essentially a backlines 1v1 roleplay between your paladin and their deity, your other players will get bored. So, involve them. If the cleric is chatting with the head priest of their temple, maybe another priest engages the rest of the party in conversation, or asks for help with something, even something as mundane as unloading a wagon of supplies. If the warlock is locked in a heated debate with their patron, describe the surrounding area getting more chaotic and hazardous as the patron's patience wanes and presence grows. You could describe how heavy winds and a swirling purple mist start to surround the party, and tell the players not engaged in the roleplay that they're finding it hard to hold on to their belongings and seem to be getting pushed away from the warlock. This could inspire them to start making strength checks to fight the winds and snap the warlock out of their trance, or maybe even start looking for a way out of the situation. And lastly, tip 5 is to know when enough is enough. Sometimes players are just struggling to keep their attention on the game, and sometimes they're just straight up disrespectful and disruptive. If someone in your game is constantly pulling other people out of the game with side conversations, constantly on their phone and always missing key plot points, or committing the worst sin of playing a phone game with the sound on, it might just be time to, well, I've said it a ton and I'll say it again, not everyone is fit for every table. Sometimes you end up with a player that just doesn't care about the game or other people enough, and you need to remove them from the group. They say no D&D is better than bad D&D, and it's 100% true. If you're having a hard time enjoying your game nights, then something needs to change, because there's no point in dedicating hours or even days of your time each week to campaign prep and play time if you're not getting any enjoyment out of it too. So try talking to the problem player, and if they refuse to change, like a rundown restaurant owner on Kitchen Nightmares, 86 they ass. I hope you found this video helpful and that some of these tips might assist you in keeping players engaged. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you have any advice for keeping players focused, or if you're struggling with this as well. Don't forget to check out the free PDF with tables to inspire you on how to keep your players engaged in split party and combat roleplay, and a huge thank you again to Homie and the Dude for sponsoring today's video. Check out the Wandering Tavern using the link in the description and use my code TWISTED25 for 25% off your order. And I'll see you wonderful tavern folk in the next video. Oh, come on, were you on your phone this entire time?